So in speaking on developing new strategies, I recently went to a conference put on by the Pennsylvania Council of Children, Youth, and Family Services. Diana Walters was the keynote speaker, and she said something that really resonated with me and my own personal journey, but also now today with my own 2 children. We hear that science has shown that young children ages 0 to 5 are at their most prime time for development. That is, it's their most prime time and most critical time in their lives. And then we hear nothing else about any other time for reconstruction. To explain the word reconstruction, your brain physically takes a shape. Several, actually, while developing. Different areas become larger than others due to what is being learned. This is a picture of a teenage brain. For those of us who are always confused about them, here is where everything is stored. Please note that communication and remembering chores and homework is a tiny spot on the very back of the brain. But also note that the love lobe, self-image, and rebellion areas are all at the very front of the brain. At this conference, the woman spoke about the brain of adolescence and that there's actually another window of opportunity to change the shape of the brain. This happens for females ages 12 to 22, for males 15 to 30. Hopefully you see the ironic humor that I did. But in all seriousness, this was amazing news to hear. She talked about risk-taking as a form of learning, and that it's part of brain development, that it's a natural part of development to engage in those risk-taking behaviors. Now, I want you to all know, I am by no means a brain scientist. I have never studied the brain, but since that conference, I did a lot of reading on the brain and the development in children and youth. If you looked closely at the last picture of the teen brain and now at this brain, hang on a second, because there's no brain up there. There we go. The frontal lobe is the last to fully develop. So that means that depending on how the brain had developed thus far, as in trauma, judgment, love, self-image, and rebellion are already late developing. Reconstruction for those parts of the brain are going to be more difficult, and they're going to take longer depending on the resiliency of that particular youth. But also another factor is just how long that trauma was endured, how hardwired this particular individual is to continue in that trauma. I did a lot of research and I Googled Dr. Segal, not seagull as in the bird. That was my first mix-up, but Segal. And if you would like to have any more information or read up any more on that, I strongly urge you to Google him, but also you can go to developingchild.harvard.edu. So I'm going to take this back to the risk-taking behavior being a natural part of development. Hopefully I have not lost you with where I'm going with this, but in my days in care, I have personally seen my own caseworker become frustrated with me because I simply wasn't following the rules. I was engaging in that risk-taking behavior, and I was hardwired to that trauma. I was prone to continue in it, creating my own trauma and my own grief. I now know that that was because that's how my brain was shaped from adolescence well into my second window of opportunity. This brings me to my point that permanency is not just for youth or children that are interested in the topic, but for all youth. These children and young adults have been through more trauma in their lives than most adults our ages, and their brains are hardwired to continue and to endure that trauma, to continue in the chaos. But if we're willing to understand and get a little more knowledge on how that brain works, it opens up a whole new way to reaching these children before they do possibly become one of those outcomes that we had discussed earlier. In an article used by the Regional Research Institute for Human Services at Portland State University called The Neurobiological Underpinnings for Trauma-Informed Care, it states all the functions of the different parts of your brain and what we use them to function. It talks about how we adapt to different survival strategies and how our environment assists in those strategies. There are some instances where our brain throws out these survival techniques without us consciously knowing that we are indeed in a survival type mode, such as, bear with me, there is a negative situation that happens in the home, in the kitchen. And years down the road, you walk into a cafe and you smell apple cinnamon tea brewing. This just so happens to be the same exact tea that was brewing years prior in your kitchen when that negative situation happened. Bouncing back to the present, you're standing in this cafe and you start getting teary-eyed and you have no idea why. This is that situation. Your brain throws you into a survival type mode. You remember that without realizing you're remembering it, and your body takes over. You are completely powerless. There are children that have experienced so many negative situations that we could trigger them at any second. They are subconsciously still dealing with that turmoil. I recently watched a short video of a child that was moved around in foster care. It was titled Removed. She saw her father abusing her mother over a dress that she had on. And for this little girl, it was absolutely traumatic. Months or years down the road, a foster mother had bought the little girl a gift. It was a beautiful pink sundress. And the little girl had flashbacks of her mom and dad and ended up regressing in behavior. She was literally powerless over the feelings that she had. They snuck up on her, they took hold of her, and it wasn't that she didn't like the dress. It was the fact that she was unintentionally remembering a traumatic experience.